So I'm here tonight to share a personal story, my story of change, specifically how this girl inspired me to shift my career, write a couple of books of fiction, and become an advocate for a country in the heart of Africa that most people have never heard of. I'll start with a snapshot from my own childhood. When I was 7, my family moved to the Ivory Coast in West Africa for several years. My parents made a point of us spending our vacations visiting rural areas, providing us with a glimpse how people live and struggle in the developing world. When we weren't traveling, I liked to make up stories and publish them as little books. But when we returned to the US, I had to replace writing fiction with writing school assignments in order to finish high school and college. I decided I wanted a career that addressed the problems I'd seen in Africa, so I eventually ended up earning a master's degree in public health and joining the Peace Corps. Yay! When I learned they were sending me to the Central African Republic, or the CAR, I had to look it up, and I had to go to the library because this was pre-internet. I learned that the local name for the CAR translates as the heart of Africa, literally. It's about the size of Texas, with a now population of 4.5 million, and it has some of the worst health indicators on the continent, in the world, actually. I was assigned to Bambari, a town that's a day's trip from the capital of Bangui. I worked with the Ministry of Health supervising health centers, and I lived in a house that felt cozy to me but was bigger than anything my neighbors lived in. Besides befriending my colleagues, I got to know my neighbors and became especially close to Marie-Flore, a mother raising her 3 girls alone. When I was assigned to Bangui for my second year, they followed me there. After I left the CAR, I tried to stay in touch with Marie-Flore, but she never answered my letters. It could be she never got them because civil servants were often on strike, including postal workers, because of salary arrears. But because she'd been sick before I left, I worried about her. After the Peace Corps, I embarked on a career managing health projects based in the US and traveling back and forth to Africa to about a dozen countries. In 1997, I accepted a job with a regional project based in the Ivory Coast, which brought me back to my childhood stomping grounds. I stayed there for 3 years, traveling and working across West and Central Africa. But my work never brought me back to the CAR. I learned that in the world of development, there are donor darlings, countries like Kenya that get tons of funding, and countries like the CAR that are virtually neglected. So I decided to travel to the CAR on my own dime. I stayed with one of my former language trainers, Dieudonné, who's pictured here. And although it was great to reconnect with former colleagues, I was not able to find my old friend Marie-Flore. And thinking about her illnesses and also the high prevalence of HIV at the time, I continued to worry. As a treat, Dieudonné hired drummers and dancers to perform for me outside his house. I wish I had a videotape of it. It was really loud and energetic, and the noise basically drew a big crowd of onlookers. After the show, everyone left except for one person, a teenage girl who came up to me and asked if I recognized her, and I did recognize her. It was actually the eldest daughter of Marie-Flore. She told me that her mother had indeed died a few years previously, while her younger sisters were taken in by an aunt. At 16, Shayla was on her own and already had a daughter. Hearing her story and understanding the risk of her repeating her mother's fate brought home the limitations of the work that I'd been doing. Attempts to improve the health of a population are basically band-aids in the face of systemic poverty. I wondered if I couldn't do more good by reviving my love of writing in order to share stories about people like Shayla with a US audience. After I moved back to the US, I completed a part-time master's program in writing while working, but I soon realized that I could never complete a full manuscript given my work and travel schedule, so I quit my job and I started writing full-time, yay! Before quitting my job, though, I took one more trip to the CAR, and I noticed how things had taken a turn for the worse, especially in the rural areas where rebels often attacked passing vehicles. So to get to Bambari, I had to be in a UN convoy with a military truck in front and another in back. Seeing people on that trip again reinforced my commitment to writing stories. That's Shayla and one of her sisters. For 2 years, I wrote full-time, tackling 2 projects. The first was a novel and stories called The Civilized World that was subsequently published, yay. And the second was a novel I'm still working on that's set in the CAR and is inspired by Shayla's story. So not long before I started the book tour to promote The Civilized World, I got rehired by my former employer, this time as an editor, with a reduced work schedule and no travel, which gives me time to work on the novel. I'm hoping to complete that this year. Meanwhile, in the CAR, things have gone from bad to worse. In 2013, the government was overthrown by a coalition of mostly Muslim rebels called Seleka that included child soldiers. The Seleka went on a rampage of looting and killing, and with no one to defend civilians, predominantly Christian vigilante groups sprang up. They call themselves the Anti-Balaka. Amid talk of genocide, the international community, led by former colony France, supported an African Union peacekeeping force. In December 2013, Samantha Power, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, visited Bangui, and yes, if you look in the back, you'll probably recognize my friend Dieudonné, because he served as her translator. Since then, the international attention has waned, even though the crisis remains. The AU force is now led by the UN, but their numbers are too small to fully rein in the tit-for-tat violence between Seleka and the Anti-Balaka, which is often oversimplified by the media as a religious conflict. Of course, civilians are the most affected. The conflict has disrupted their ability to meet the most basic needs for safety, food, and healthcare. Almost 500,000 refugees are currently either in neighboring countries, living in forests, or at refugee camps like the one here, shown by the airport in Bangui. Tonight's theme raises the question, how can positive change happen for the CAR? Central Africans need to be and will be at the forefront of a peaceful resolution, but in the meantime, the country needs outside support to get back on its feet. I believe the first step in positive change is awareness. Awareness that the CAR exists, that it is worthy of attention, and that the lives of Central Africans matter as much as the lives of anyone else. Thank you for listening.